Hello, and welcome to Building Your Brand on Over-the-Top platforms. Over-the-Top will be referred to as OTT throughout the duration of this presentation. I am Morgan Gonzalez, Vice President of Account Management with Education Dynamics, and will be serving as your moderator today. I'm joined by two speakers, Mo Chughtai and Laura Polich. Mo is a television data and advertising expert, having worked in the intersection of digital and television his entire career. He currently works at MIQ as a product lead, where he owns global product development, go-to-market, and partnership efforts for the advanced television line. Laura is the Director of Awareness Marketing at Education Dynamics and has been working in awareness marketing for over 16 years and has been working exclusively in post-secondary marketing for the past 8. During her tenure at Education Dynamics, she has worked with many education institutions to develop and execute marketing plans that include non-traditional media, like OTT, streaming, and social. Note, Mo and myself will be available following the presentation to field any questions you may have. So without further ado, we will begin. As we begin today's discussion on how to build your brand through OTT, we'd be remiss if we didn't start with what is over the top and why is it relevant in today's marketing landscape? Laura, would you be able to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a very common question that we're asked, like, what is OTT? I feel it's one of those very common jargon words, but people really don't understand fundamentally what it is. And the way I best describe it is that it's as simple as not having or being tied to a cable set-top box from a known provider that just sits on top of your fireplace. That's pretty much like from Comcast, Time Warner, Charter, and that you are just using an internet connection in order to stream video. That's as easy as you can explain it. And we know that there are ways where we have smart TVs that people are able to utilize. People make smart TVs with their flat screens by plugging in a Fire Stick, a Google Chromecast. People stream that using tablets, mobile devices. So there's a multitude of ways that you can view video content. So you're not just tied to the TV in the living room with your set-top box provider. So this kind of landscape shows the breakout of the devices in the middle, all the different enabled devices. Gaming consoles are a very common one that people stream through, especially on family room TVs. And then over on the right, it's a good illustration that shows just kind of how the landscape works, where you see the video providers on top, where you see like the YouTube TV, PlayStation View, Direct Now, and then you see the actual apps that are from like the networks that you would be most commonly familiar with, like your Bravo's, CNN, and we have private marketplace deals directly within those networks. And then there's a multitude of free apps as well that people utilize, like Crackle, Pluto is one that I'm seeing on the rise from that. And so that's kind of like how you choose like your content. So this overall landscape is a good illustration of just how this ecosystem works outside of just having an AT&T set-top box. And the reason why we think that this is really important to discuss today is looking at the overall trends of just usage of it from a household basis. So we know that it has been something that's been on the rise, where quarter after quarter, large telecom providers cite that they have subscribers continually going down each quarter, and that people are either cutting the cord completely or they're adding on services to this, and they're utilizing other ones streaming. And we've predicted, at least from some other sources, that this would be probably something that would meet in the middle in about 5 years from now. And we are anticipating that to be much more accelerated due to COVID. When everybody was stuck in their houses starting on March 13th, the amount of subscribers that signed into having a Hulu subscription and then wanting to stream more content on like Netflix and then adding an HBO and all those continue to rise dramatically from that point of time over the summer. And what we've also seen too, from just a best practices and being around for quite a while, that most of the time, once you sign up for a subscriber service, you're not canceling it. So we don't see this trend reducing anytime soon. So we're seeing that it's going to be even more imperative for our partners to utilize these OTT platforms as part of your overall awareness strategy within your broadcast buy, even more important now than we thought it would be at a sooner rate. Mo, do you have anything else want to add for this?
Yeah, I think the point you mentioned about when a subscriber signs up, they tend to stick is really interesting. What's also interesting is we see when someone signs up for a streaming service, their overall consumption of TV starts to shift into that streaming service. So it's not like you're signing up for a Peacock or one of these services and you're layering on another hour of TV consumption on the 4 hours you're already spending on traditional. Over time, we're seeing as users adopt streaming services, the bulk of their time is also spent on those services. So if you look at just smart TV homes or Wi-Fi homes, which we have here, the number of Wi-Fi homes that have both traditional and streaming services, that's actually declining over time. We're seeing people cut the cord as they realize most of their time spent is actually in these new services and not on traditional TV.
Yep.
And so just to kind of build on that, we're just seeing the scale of OTT content and consumption increase as an increasing number of these services are available in the market. Last year, we saw a plethora of these come to market between the Peacocks, between sort of a number of these. And so what we're seeing today is over 70 million homes today have and use streaming OTT services. 2/3 of homes with Wi-Fi have streaming services integrated in. And the bulk of these services, or the bulk of homes that have OTT services, are actually spending most of their time streaming video as opposed to watching it on traditional cable. MIQ sees with our own data for homes that have smart TVs, roughly half of time spent from those homes entirely is on their streaming services as opposed to traditional TV. So in order to reach these households effectively, you really need to have a streaming strategy as a brand. And so beyond scale, on the next slide, I've got a bit of a view of the advantages that brands get, when they're using OTT or using streaming as a channel to reach their audiences. So scale is obviously a big one. There's a huge bulk of audiences that are there, but interestingly, it's not just a migrate, spend over and find audiences where they are. You can also start to get a little bit more effective with your streaming budgets and make those dollars go further for you. The first way you do that is with audience-based buying. So rather than, with traditional trying to predict with where your audience is, which programming, what time of day, which markets they're active, with OTT, you can actually buy an audience directly. So the same way you buy search or display or social, where you have an in-market audience or a CRM audience that you're targeting, you can layer on that same audience-based buying on OTT as well and reach those consumers regardless of which service you're on, right? So it's more of an audience-based buy than it is a contextual or service-driven buy. The same thing is true for sort of cross-channel buying. We're seeing a ton of advertisers obviously test OTT and use it to find incremental audiences. There's a suite of TV data that's out there that lets you target users that maybe you haven't reached on TV yet, or target just underexposed users. And so we call that TV retargeting, and it allows you to sort of make sure your OTT campaign is fully complementary to your traditional campaign.
And that's something we've been utilizing a lot too, from like an Eddy perspective with partners, especially when ground campuses were closed and there's unused search dollars, so that we can kind of push that. And we saw testing right during peak COVID time in markets that we were utilizing a TV retargeting strategy versus markets of similar size that we weren't, where we saw across the board there were declines, but the one like a nationwide during the summertime, but the one market that we were utilizing TV retargeting in as a test did not have any decline. So that was definitely a good telling part, where it's like the worst time ever to test anything, but just trying to like mitigate all of the perils that were happening from like an advertising side, like with school. So that's been something that we've layered on. It's like a best practice now too.
Absolutely. And then Laura, you had sort of mentioned the connection to Wi-Fi households and IP addresses. The cool thing about connected TV is it's all digital, right? It's all connected to your internet. And so the same way internet connected ads on display or video, or you're able to sort of measure them more effectively than traditional channels, you can sort of add that same level of measurability on connected TV as well. So what that IP address allows you to do is connect an impression or an ad exposure on someone's connected TV screen tied to an IP address. And then if that person on their same IP address is on their phone and goes to your website and signs up for a class or signs up for a webinar, you're able to link those two together. So that connectivity between connected TV and other devices ends up being a real value add when you're looking at a holistic campaign and maybe just not your video budget as a standalone. So those are some of the advantages from a sort of targeting perspective. One thing that we've seen brands also lean into is the creative benefits of connected TV and OTT advertising. And so on the next slide, I've got a couple of examples of what that looks like. So we're seeing brands really lean into the interactivity of connected TV. So where in the past you were sort of limited by the medium on TV, just in terms of the video assets that you could sort of share, we're seeing brands lean in with a couple of different formats on connected TV that allow you a little bit more engagement with your clients and with your audience to gather a bit more attention. And so some examples of that are on the left-hand side, you've got sort of a brand that used a creative overlay. So the primary messaging on the video garnering the most attention, and then an overlay on the side with product information. And so this ends up being a really popular sort of way of attracting attention to a specific part or a feature in the product that you want to highlight. Similarly, we've seen other brands lean into creative end cards. So if you've got a call to action or a website you're trying to drive into, an end card's a good way to do that. Or a local sort of dealership, obviously outside of the education vertical, sort of a component there as well.
Yeah, and we've personally been testing that interactivity, the overlay screen for a lot of our partners, and we've seen engagement rates increase from site visits from a 1.5 to 3.55%. That's noted on the screen. So that's a way where we know that majority of the viewing time is still done on a connected TV device where there's not anything clickable from like a tablet or mobile device. So you're going to see limited direct attribution in regards to that from like an OTT perspective. But this is definitely a way where you can layer on interactivity, have a different type of call to action and testing that we've definitely been able to utilize in this space.
Perfect. And on the next slide, we've got a view of, Laura, another sort of component that you talked about, which was really that TV to digital or TV to mobile retargeting component. And so this is a really popular sort of, tactic that brands are starting to lean into, where you're serving a connected TV ad and then serving a second screen mobile ad a few hours later or next day to really drive some call to action on a video campaign.
Yeah, we've been utilizing this from a competitor strategy where we know that a household has been exposed to a competitor's TV ads and we can't compete with their broadcast budget. So then we can then go on a household level and within the other devices and show a display ad, as well as within our own ads as well, knowing that retargeting is definitely a best practice across search and social. And so being able to utilize that on an awareness front has been kind of a game changer, I think, this past year.
Absolutely. We're definitely seeing brands lean into that more and more. And the way that's sort of activated or what powers that is, again, that IP address or that internet connectivity on the CTV side, which lets you match a CTV device to a mobile device and reaches the same person across different devices in that way. And then beyond some of these sort of tactics that we've tried from a connected TV and an expansion perspective, there's also a few experimental units that we're starting to see brands really lean into. Some of these are around how you measure OTT or connected TV and connect it to sort of outcomes. So we're seeing brands start to test out QR codes or drive to phone messaging, where you've got sort of a phone number with a custom sort of a number tied to a campaign. There's a lot of these more sort of ever-evolving experimental units that I think over time, just the fact that you can layer interactivity into the unit just opens up the more and more opportunity for over time.
Yeah, and I'm impressed because I feel QR codes were a thing in the past and kind of dying out for a while, and then COVID happened, and then it's on every menu, so you're not touching anything. And so also I feel for a while you used to have an app on your mobile device to be able to have it, so a majority of people didn't really know how to, but now you can just have like your camera open and it finds it. So that's something that's been like huge change, I feel, from like an industry perspective of now they're cool again. People are very familiar with it now. So that's something we're definitely interested in wanting to test from like a connected TV standpoint.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of where audience habits have evolved over time, and they've enabled you to do sort of cool, exciting things on the creative front that just previously didn't make sense.
So now that we have a clear understanding of the benefits of the medium, some of the, different things that you can do with creative that you may not have the opportunity to do on spot or broadcast, coming back around to the question surrounding mix, how do you determine which provider or platform to add into your consideration set?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Morgan. So I'll kick off and then I'll hand it off to Laura. I think just at a high level, it's important for brands to recognize that when you're looking at the number of options you have in the OTT sphere, there's an increasing number of publishers you can work with. And I think usually when a brand starts their OTT strategy, they have a view in mind of what some of the top OTT applications are, and maybe you can start with one of the large ones. I think what we see and we tend to emphasize for brands is it's important to have a holistic strategy when it comes to publishers on the OTT side. There's a real diversity in terms of how audiences spend their time, where we don't see any platform on the OTT side that's ad supported that has greater than 30% of the available audience reach for any individual audience. And so if you're a university that's thinking about where do I spend my dollars, it usually isn't as simple as, well, if I spend on YouTube or if I spend on Hulu, I'm going to reach the bulk of my audience. You really do need to evaluate a number of publishers to get the broadest amount of reach against an audience.
Yeah, and that's where like programmatic buying definitely comes into play, because we just want to make sure that we are where our target audience is at, and we're like showing that university's message where it is at. So regardless if they're running watching Hulu one day, or then the next day they're watching something on like an ESPN or a Bravo network, we just want to make sure that we are where the audience is. And there's definitely not a one size fits all platform that covers that to where you can put all of your OTT dollars to it and think that you're reaching to your max capacity. And something from an education dynamic standpoint that we've done in correlation with that exact same like previous slide is that wanting to know like where should you start? Where's the best way to start with that? Knowing that like Hulu is going to have a set spend minimum, where do we need to go from there? And so one thing that we've definitely adopted from like a best practice and like an onboarding and a good jump off point is doing a media habit survey from enrolled students, where you can do a $5 Amazon gift card and incentivized survey and just kind of ask like those students who are enrolled, what are they watching? Like, who are they? Are they listening to local radio? Are they streaming Pandora? Are they only watching Hulu? Do they not watch any Hulu at all? And then you can also add in other like university type like questions as well. People utilize that as like a good time when you're polling your students, because essentially we're wanting to create a lookalike audience from those enrollments. So let's start there. Like that's something that you can use as a starting off point. It's not the end all be all. There's other parts that you need to layer in with that, but that's a really good way of knowing that. Maybe everybody in your student population has Sirius satellite. And so that might be something where satellite radio makes a big point of that. I know we've done surveys with that where we like propose that and they think, oh, our college students, they're college students, they're broke, they don't have money for all these streaming platforms. And it's like, they make money, they make time for having those streaming platforms. So that's a good way of kind of getting an idea of where your target student is at. And then utilizing the audience-based planning tools that I know like Mo, you can talk more about here in a second about from MIQ standpoint, where we can get an idea of what your brand affinity audience is with some of the TV data that we have access to. And you're able to see what kind of like programs are they watching? Are they over indexing on certain networks or crime shows, or what kind of usability do they already have now versus like a linear TV versus OTT strategy? So there's a lot of partner tools that we have available to us to aid in an overall plan development. And another good part, especially for like if you're an online school and you're wanting to go into different markets, is doing a brand recall awareness study. That you can do it through like an aided one, an unaided one, where you can say, hey, like, what is your brand perception of our brand in this market? Do they not know you? Do they have a negative one? Do they think you're expensive? And just get an idea of just some pain points that you want to touch on. And then you can kind of get an idea of like the level of awareness you're going to say. If like, oh, I wanted to go into Dallas and nobody in this survey here knows anything about my school. But their big complaints about some of these other schools are X, Y, and Z. So then your creative messaging can kind of tailor to that as well. So that's really helpful too, just to get an idea of what your perception is and where you should start from an awareness strategy.
Perfect. And I'm just going to hone in on one of those pieces, which is the audience-based planning tool. So Laura, you sort of mentioned, and I think this is something that brands are starting to get in the habit of, which is asking their audiences or asking their students which channels and which platforms they're streaming content on already, right? The cool thing about that is that's truly deterministic data, right? It's your audience telling you where to reach them best. I think one of the areas that we tend to sort of see a complement to that with some of the planning tools we've got on our side are when you're looking to slice and dice that data a little bit more granularly than an entire student population. Or if you're looking at, what do my prospects or potential students in a given vertical or market or a given program you tend to watch. And so on the next slide, I've got sort of a view of an audience-based planning tool that MIQ has, which we call Discover. And this is really focused on allowing brands to search for an audience and find how that audience is consuming digital and streaming and traditional TV side by side. And so the way we do this is we actually go out and collect smart TV activation and viewing data across 20 plus million households in the US. We line that up against any audience that you're looking at. So that could be a CRM list, people who've signed up for a webinar, but that could also be sort of a more prospect list, like a third-party segment, and run that against the data that we've got on our side and show you exactly what percentage of that population is watching traditional, what's watching OTT, and then within each of those broad buckets, what the individual partners are that you should be investing in to best reach that audience as well.
Yeah, and that's something that's been a game changer, I think, too, just with our partnership that we have from an Eddie and MIQ perspective, is that we're able to go in and get an idea of, from an affinity standpoint, how much of your audience is only utilizing those OTT platforms. And so this example shows that for a client, it was 46%. And then you see over on the right-hand side that 35% are only utilizing broadcast, and that there's a pretty small subset of shared from like that 19% perspective. So that would tell me if we were to only put all of our eggs in one basket and allocate money to a linear TV broadcast strategy, that we'd be missing out on a large chunk of our OTT audience to reach and to spread that partner message. And then on the vice versa side, if we only did OTT, there's a significant amount there that's still also utilizing that broadcast platform. So that it comes up with an idea of how much kind of spend based on a budget and within a market that we would want to allocate between like those channels, knowing that there's still a case now for the foreseeable future that you're going to want a mix of those if budget allows for that. And then being able to utilize a lot of just like the app data from a network standpoint has been a game changer as well. So that if we do have then a cable buy running within a market and that we see based on audience insights that the top networks that are performing are CNN and Bravo, then we can also make sure we're having that up in our local cable strategy as well, to have like some synergies. And then making sure to just from like an audience insight, knowing that your enrollment might skew male, but then based on some pixel analysis that we're able to see actually 80% of the web traffic going to your site are female. So what's on the landing page that may be a disconnect there? How can we maybe capitalize on that? So there's a lot of useful tools that we're able to get from like this particular platform.
Laura, can you maybe touch on how you can utilize this to identify who may be in your competitive set? So beyond just targeting to the audience that you can capture via linear or OTT or together, how would you be able to leverage some of this information to ensure that you are present where your competitors are?
Yeah, knowing that Kantar is the one that only gets you so far from like a competitive spend standpoint, and there's a lot of handicaps along the way with that. This has been able to having this discover insights of putting in a competitor's brand to get an idea of what networks they are popping up on from like their audience insight to say, hey, we want to make sure that we're spreading our message because we know we're a stronger university than this competitor is. And we want to make sure we have placement like within those ones, or if they're over indexing in fashion and makeup shows, we want to make sure that our strategy aligns with that so that we are making sure that those messages are being seen across the board. And I think it's also a good because there's not like a holy grail of information from a competitor set as to how much a client or might be spending already in the OTT space. And so that we're able to glean some insights from that as well to get an idea of like, oh, they appear to be active then within these platforms, and they appear to be pretty heavy within Hulu right now, so that we're able to make sure that our overall awareness strategy complements that, and we're addressing as much as possible with the insights that we have available. All right, and that's part of our, what we keep touching on, especially from like that last screen where you saw like the OTT audience versus the linear broadcast audience and what the overall shared approach was, is that there's not going to be a one size fits all. We're not going to want to create an overall awareness strategy that only allocates spend to Hulu and then just runs it across the board, same spend all the way through. There's going to be a big part of this is going to have to be a holistic approach. And we know just from our expertise as well, from driving awareness, that it's not just one medium, and that when you layer on other ones like the prospecting display and you layer in your social strategy with this, and then layering in streaming audio, that we've seen exponential growth from a web standpoint in terms of traffic to your site when we layer on multiple pieces of mediums as well as TV retargeting and other retargeting sources versus just allocating one. So it's going to be really important that when we partner with anybody, that we're looking at seasonality, we're looking at your guys' start dates, we're capitalizing on the Olympics of 2020 now being in the summer of 2021, being outside of political windows, so that, you know, based on like retail wanting to be lighter during Facebook and Instagram and social during holiday, and that you have like a full multi-channel approach when we're wanting to create awareness for your brand that will later be captured in your lead gen channels from search and social strategies.
So once your mix is clear, what KPIs would you recommend utilizing to quantify success?
And this is something that for a long time, I feel that people thought once you just like place ads on TV that you have no idea like how it worked. I feel like that was like kind of like an industry thing for the last like 10 years. And that's something that's definitely, I feel that Eddie has evolved in this, because I feel we're constantly revamping reporting and getting new insights for that, because we want to show that these awareness dollars are doing something to your bottom line. And so the way that we look at this from performance indicator standpoint, knowing that it might be a while until you have like an enrollment file, is that when we launch an awareness campaign and we start like with an OTT display Spotify strategy, that the number one thing that we're going to look at is what happens with your brand impressions. Are we seeing from like your PPC brand search campaign, is there an increase year over year? Is there an increase month over month in a market when you launch that? Do we see higher traffic and higher clicks going to that site? Do we see a higher conversion rate? Are we sending better quality traffic because we're able to target your student better than just placing a broadcast ad and targeting adults 25-49 in Dallas? So we utilize those three as like our number one as an indicator, knowing that if we're not going to see an increase in the beginning from brand impressions and clicks and conversion rate, it's going to be a lot harder to see that from like an inquiry app to enrollment standpoint further down the funnel. So we utilize that as like our number one KPIs for that. And then we'll also look at Google Analytics. Do we see in from search traffic for your main site, to your .edu site? Are we seeing new site visitors? Are they spending longer time on the page as well? Do we see an impact there, knowing it's not only going to come from like your paid landing page? It's a trifecta of both. And then we look at further down the journey by ingesting like CRM data to see, okay, once we launch this campaign for 3 months, our cost per starts went down 20%. And so within this market versus a market of similar size that we weren't doing an awareness plan in. And so we ingest like those big factors, as well as some of the ones that Mo can talk about in terms of like optimizations that they do on their side, as well as our partner in terms of like our OTT buys.
Mo, is there anything that you would add as it relates to quantifying success?
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of this comes down to the level of data that you're able to get out of programmatic when you're using that to buy audiences or buy against streaming platforms, as opposed to doing some of the kind of direct buying individually. Obviously, sort of place for all of that within a media mix, but on the programmatic side, what you are able to get is an individual sort of, you know, strategy wide or platform wide or device breakdown in terms of where you're seeing that performance, whether that's a drive to action, if you're seeing that more across, you know, smart TV screens or on some of the streaming sticks like a Chromecast or an Amazon, comparing and contrasting some of that conversion data and getting the micro optimization down within a streaming strategy, I think is one of the areas that we've seen really strong success in. And then I think for media partners, what we've seen is really leaning into the partnership dynamic between an agency, a brand, and a partner, and being able to give the feedback back and saying, you know, we're seeing more audiences convert on this platform and then on, LG devices, for example, on the smart TV side, and working out ways to heavy up and add that within a targeting mix. And making it more of a dialogue between the partner, the agency, and the brand.
And I think that's something that definitely sets us apart from an education dynamics, media IQ, MIQ standpoint with that, is that there's a lot of collaboration with that, knowing that vendor metrics are going to show one thing, but then at the end of the day, we want to make sure, like, what do our partners see? What are we seeing in terms of like students in the seats and enrollment? And so that's where the both of us definitely work together, I feel, from like a partnership standpoint, to see like from when we launch an awareness campaign, what impact that really is having, like at the end of the day, on our clients.
Totally.
As we come to a close, Mo and Laura, is there anything beyond some of the questions or material that we covered today that would be beneficial or you would like to leave as parting thoughts for those of us who joined and are thinking about building their brand through this platform?
Yeah, I can start with that. I feel like the number one question is always like, how much money does it cost for me to start? Like, that's like my number one question I get like for clients. And I feel that that's where a lot of like the research part like comes in for that, to really come up with like a full funnel plan, because you're going to want to make sure you have budget for longer than a month running, right? Because we want to make sure that we have time for optimizations and that we can actually track performance and see an impact, because we know awareness is something that is more of a long-tailed approach for that. So getting an idea of what markets you want to go in, really understanding your target audience as well. And if we have like any other key points of data by utilizing that hub, intelligence hub, to get an idea of what your brand affinity audience already looks like, to really kind of come up with a strategy that's going to make sense for your media efforts, and what type of creative you have, and what options that we have available to from some of the interactive overlays and components that we can add in for that. So I would say that there typically is something that we can do with almost any budget from that, but that kind of like leaning on us to be able to provide recommendations to make sure you're hitting the right share of voice within an audience, and that you're going to make an impact that you'll be able to see key measurable insights off of.
And then I would just add to that, I think just not seeing connected TV or OTT in a silo, and seeing how it complements the rest of your media mix. So if you're running audio in a market, if you're running traditional TV in a market, then formats like TV retargeting end up being really powerful, right? And that's a way to complement those two together. If you're running both OTT and audio together, using the kind of measurability of both those formats to see, if I hit someone with a streaming ad and then an audio ad, what is the likelihood of that conversion happening? I think just the connectivity, we're seeing, increased performance when an audience is reached on multiple formats rather than just one. And so I think leaning onto that is really important. And then I think I'll just emphasize from Laura's point, the creative aspect is one that I think brands get to when they start exploring OTT further. It's one of the really exciting things about the OTT format is you can get creative and you can find sort of unique ways to engage an audience that's not just your standard video ad.
Wonderful. Well, on behalf of Mo, Laura, and myself, we want to thank everyone again for joining us today, and we will see you all shortly for your live questions.